In this lesson, we're going to take a look at solving for quadratic equations by using completing the square. First of all, just so we know what a quadratic equation is, this is an example. It's in this form, x squared. The numbers may change, but this is the form. You have an x squared, you have an x with a coefficient of x. If I ever say coefficient of x, that would refer to the 4. The 4 is my coefficient of x. And then you have a number without an x, and since it's an equation, it is equal to 0 in this case, but some sort of number. Now this can be rearranged in the form of x plus a squared equals k. This is kind of going to be our formula that we're going to use for completing the square. Okay, completing the square formula. So to solve for these problems, I'm going to divide it into steps because they are a little bit trickier. The math isn't difficult, it's just kind of remembering the steps and how to follow. So in example 51, or 50.1, it says solve x squared plus 6x minus 4 equals 0 by using completing the square. Now there's going to be other ways to solve these in the future, but completing the square, we do need to know this for other lessons as well. Like we said, we need it in x plus a squared equals k form. So I divided this into steps. So let's look at step 1. Step 1 is add the number without the x or x squared. So we're looking at this. This is our formula, or not formula, sorry. This is our problem. So which number is not connected to an x or x squared? Well, that's our negative 4. What we want to do is start by adding this to the other side. So I went ahead and added the 4 to the other side, added 4. And now that leaves me left with x squared plus 6x equals 4. And notice I left a blank here, and we'll get to why I left a blank there in a second. But that's the first step. Get rid of, if I called it A, B, and C, get rid of C. Get it on the other side and isolate A and B. Step 2 is find the coefficient of x. So coefficient of x, like we said in the last one, is the one attached to the letter x. So our coefficient of x here is the number 6. 6 is the coefficient of x. Now, this kind of has subcategories. Part A is we need to divide the coefficient of x by 2. So divide coefficient of x by 2. That'd be 6 over 2. And then the second part is square it. So I kind of wrote all this. It's in parentheses, so we make sure to divide before we square. So what we would do is 6 divided by 2 equals 3. And then we would be left with 3 squared. 3 squared. So that would equal 9. Okay? So that's what we get there. We get 9. So now we just did step 2. Now step 3 says to add the number that we just found, the 9, to both sides. So we were at this stage, and what I did to get to here was I simply added 9 on this side, add 9 on that side, and you'll see that that looks exactly the same here. Step 4 is to simplify. To find k. Now when you simplify, this right here is going to stay the same. Okay? This is actually not what we're referring to. The only part you can simplify is on the right side. That's the 4 plus 9. So you do 4 plus 9 and find that k equals 13. K is over here. Notice that this is on the right side of the equal sign, just like we've done everything throughout, these steps. So we know that k equals 13. Let's move on to step number 5. Step number 5, now we're going to find a in our formula of x plus a squared equals k. We find a by dividing the coefficient of x by 2. Well, this is where we were at. The coefficient of x is the 6. Okay, that's the coefficient. And so then we divide that by 2. 6 over 2 equals 3, therefore we have A. That is how you solve A. These steps, you can rearrange them in whatever way you want. To be honest, I would solve for A first. Or I would just know A first because we already kind of did it in step 4. Or step 2, I guess it was. But any way you want to do it works for me as long as it's the right answer. So we get 3 for A, and now we know that A equals 3, K equals 13, and those were our 2 variables we needed. So now we can plug those in and solve. So put 3 in for A and 13 in for K. Remember, this is our formula. And now we solve. And we've done this kind of solving before. If you have the squared, we square root it. Square root both sides. Remember, if we square root this, that becomes a plus or minus square root of 13. And that equals x plus 3. Now to get x by itself, subtract. X equals negative 3 plus or minus square root of 13 would be your answer. And that's how you do completing the square. Now let's try one example without using, using the steps, but without looking at it in that format. Let's look at example 50.3, x squared equals 5x minus 5. First thing you want to do is get it in order to where it's x squared, x, then the one with no x. So we need to subtract 5x and add the 5. So now it looks like that. And now we can start working on it. X squared minus 5x plus 5, and the x squared is positive. Okay, the first step said to add the number without the x or x squared. So we add this number to the other side. So what that becomes is x squared minus 5x equals negative 5 from subtracting the 5 on both sides. Okay, so that was step 1. Step 2 was find the coefficient of x. Coefficient of x is negative 5. Take the coefficient of x, divide it by 2, and square it. Okay, well that would be saying negative 5 over 2 times negative 5 over 2. And that would actually be 25 over 4. So 25 over 4. Positive. From there, we add this here and here. So I'm going to put plus 25 over 4 plus 25 over 4. You saw that? Now we got to add those fractions. Negative 5 plus, or over 1 plus 25 over 4. Got to multiply this by 4, so that becomes 4 and 20. 20 over 4 is 5. Negative 20 plus 25 becomes a positive 5 over 4. So now we're left with x squared minus 5x. Or actually, let me just say this. Now we found k. That was the whole purpose of that there, to find k. And now we need to just find a in our form of x plus a squared equals k. We got k. Now we need to find a. Remember, all we did to find a was take the coefficient of x and divide it by 2. This right here is our coefficient of x and divided by 2. Not going to change it to a decimal or anything, just going to keep it like so. So then a equals negative 5 over 2. Negative 5 over 2. So then we have x and a and can plug it into our formula. Okay, x minus 5 over 2 squared We do plug it in as minus since it's a negative, equals 5 over 4. And then we can solve. Square root. This becomes plus or minus square root of 5 over 4 equals x minus 5 over 2. Add 5 halves. I'm going to move it over here. X equals 5 halves plus or minus square root of 5 over 4. Now we're almost simplified. There is actually one thing we can do. Since this is a square root of 4 on the bottom, I could totally write it this way as well. This is the same thing, square root of 5 over square root of 4. Since it's square root of 4 on the bottom, we can simplify it, because square root of 4 is 2. So we can say x equals 5 over 2 plus or minus square root of 5 over positive 2. Because remember, we don't really want the radical in the denominator. That's not simplified. So that's how you do completing the square. Go over the steps. It'll just take some practice until they'll get memorized and it'll be easy peasy. But go over those steps and memorize them so you can do completing the square.